Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 465 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So I want you to go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, I love going to fraternity and sorority conferences every single year, not only because I get the opportunity to meet the students in person versus social media, as an example, but also because I get to meet amazing new resources to help these students and team up with them. And that is exactly what happened with our next guest when we were seated at the same table for lunch at NGLA, the Northeast Greek Leadership Association. And we got to talking about the types of programs that she offers to college students. And I have to tell you, I was just totally blown away. And I think that our listeners are going to absolutely love her programs too. So let's get into it. Stefania Ianno is the founder of Breaking Stalking, a trained marriage and family therapist and a survivor of stalking. Her passion to educate communities on stalking awareness and prevention grew from her own personal experience and recognizing that there is a lack of knowledge, research, and victim resources surrounding the crime of stalking. Stefania believes that this needs to change, especially after hearing too many stories similar to hers, but ended with the loss of life. This is the main motivator for Stefania, raising awareness and teaching others how to recognize stalking and intervene at an early stage that can potentially prevent additional crimes from occurring. Stefania's lifelong desire is to develop a career focused on helping others to improve their quality of life and empower themselves. Stefania now shares her experiences, provides this education nationwide, and motivates others to take their lives into their own hands. Breaking Stalking is located in wonderful, my favorite, upstate New York. Welcome to the show, Stefania.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
Hey, it is my pleasure to highlight wonderful people that are doing amazing things with college students. And you are certainly that, if nothing else. You are absolutely that, and you are making a difference. And I'm so happy that you are on the show to share all of this great information with our listeners. And, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your undergrad experience because I love kind of digging into this. You decided on the University of Rochester for your undergraduate degree and also later for your master's degree in marriage, family therapy, and counseling. And obviously, I am very happy to hear this because I spent a lot of days as an undergraduate kind of commuting between Buffalo and Rochester. They're separated by 60 miles exactly. It'll take you exactly 1 hour to go between these campuses. And I had such a great experience there in Rochester. I mean, I had friends that actually went to RIT. I went for garbage plates at like 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, this was like a whole thing. And I'm sure that you could have gone to many schools. You are extremely bright. So why did you decide on the University of Rochester?
Well, I'd been focusing a little bit more on the master's degree, but for undergrad, I actually received a little bit of a scholarship to go to U of R.
Uh-huh.
And in terms of going there, I knew I wanted to study psychology and theater and Italian,
Mhm.
and I could do all of that right away without having to fulfill a core curriculum. So in terms of their undergrad campus, I really, really liked that because I wanted to be able to focus on the things that I wanted to study and do that right away, right?
Mhm.
So that was the main reason for the undergrad and deciding on Rochester. And after the fact, of course, as you're talking about, I really fell in love with Rochester as a city, right?
Uh-huh.
It's similar to Syracuse, where I was born and raised, in central New York here, but it's bigger, it's more cultural, there's more to do. It's got all the festivals and concerts and all of that great stuff. So I really loved it as a city as well. And then in terms of deciding to stay there, it's actually a funny story. I had applied and been accepted to Syracuse University, and I was actually all set to go there, move back to my hometown, go to grad school in Syracuse, save some money, live at home, do that whole thing. But I was still living in Rochester. I decided to attend the U of R MFT program's open house that they had. And honestly, I just really connected with their staff, their professors, and the students that I met there. But additionally, their MFT program is in the Department of Psychiatry, which sits in Strong Memorial Hospital. So you're in
Mm,
this hospital setting, which I think is very different as compared to most other marriage and family therapy programs. And so I just felt like there were a lot of learning opportunities and a lot of other connections to be made. And certain aspects of their program, they have this medical family therapy intensive that's like a week-long course that's part of their curriculum, which was really interesting. And there were also a lot of really great placements that you could do for your clinical work, both at the hospital and in some of the community settings. So it was really about the people, but the program's also really robust. So I was like,
mhm.
this wasn't the plan, but I'm gonna stay here.
That is really cool. Yeah, being affiliated with a hospital, that does make a big difference. So I definitely get that. And you're right about the people. I mean, the people in Western New York are some of the most amazing people you will ever meet. So don't sleep on Western New York. Don't sleep on Rochester. Don't sleep
Yeah,
on Buffalo. Don't sleep
agreed.
on Syracuse. There are some amazing, amazing people that are in these cities. And I tell you what, I mean, if I could take all the people that lived in Buffalo and move them to Nashville, where I live today, I would, because they would literally give you the shirt off their back if they could to help you. And that's just a beautiful thing. I mean, that's it's the people that really make these cities great. That's really kind of
Yeah.
what I've determined.
Don't get down on New Yorkers, because wherever we are in New York City and otherwise, we will help you. We are good people. I agree with this message.
Well, a lot of people, if they're not from New York, they all they think about is like New York City, right? They don't know Western
Exactly.
New York at all. They have no
Exactly.
idea that. Guess what? It's beautiful. It is literally stunning.
Yep.
But you have to go there and check it out. So I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think that's really important. Now, if we go back to 2011, right? You were stalked in 2011 by somebody that you thought was actually a friend of yours. So what happened that day?
Yeah, so what happened then is I was actually taking a break from my master's degree program, decided to stay in Rochester, live there, work there. I was working. And it was actually someone who I had gone on a couple of dates with, decided I don't want to date this person more seriously,
Mhm,
romantically.
mhm,
So we decided to stay friends because we had a pretty good rapport. And so we would do the normal friend stuff, go to a concert, grab dinner, platonic friendship. So fast forward to October of 2011, there was a mutual acquaintance of ours who came forward and said, "Hey, can I talk to you about so and so? They're talking to me about you. They're saying a lot of really weird things. They have code names for you. They have code names for your ex-boyfriend. They hate your ex-boyfriend. They're just doing and saying all of these things." And two of the, I think, more concerning things for this person was that this supposed friend of mine had been talking about a gun they wanted to buy with a silencer, and also had stated that they put a GPS tracker on my car. And so this acquaintance of ours, obviously, I think was pretty scared at that point and said, I think their thought process was, let me tell Stefania before something escalates or something happens, right?
mhm, mhm,
So they told me, we talked about it. They actually came to my house the next day. The acquaintance came to my house the next day so we would make a police report. Unfortunately, I think the police officer didn't really believe me about the GPS tracker thing, or just thought, I remember them saying, well, our GPS trackers, we have to go back and like confiscate them to recharge them, right? We have to get them again and recharge them. So it probably would have been a pretty big task for this person to be doing that. Um, the police officer left. Lo and behold, I went to the car place that's next to the restaurant I was working at the time. And I said, "Hey, this is going to sound really weird. Can you lift my car up and see if there's something that doesn't belong there, like a GPS tracker?" And they found a GPS tracker on my car. So I had to call the police back. I took some pictures for evidence just in case. I didn't know what to do in that situation, but my brain was working as fast as it could to help protect myself, essentially.
mhm.
Um, yeah, and everything just kind of unraveled from there. So my university and police worked hand in hand to arrest this person for one night, and then the judge brought them up on charges of stalking in the fourth degree, which is a Class B misdemeanor in New York State. An order of protection was automatically put in place for me. Um, and yeah, and it just all kind of happened from there. So I did end up leaving Rochester, going back to Syracuse, living with my parents for safety, obviously. But there was a disciplinary hearing because this person was also a student. So that happened. There were other court proceedings that I didn't attend, but obviously they had been charged with stalking in the area, so there were court proceedings they had to attend.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so then I was just trying to piece back together my life in Syracuse, which wasn't really the plan to go back there. But then some of the stalking actually did continue. There were bizarre hang up phone calls at my house. There were spoofing phone calls. My mom's 100% sure that she saw the person drive by, even though that's a breaking of the order of protection, of course. So stuff was still happening, but this time it was happening in front of my face. I knew that it was happening. I knew that they were there, right? So it didn't really stop with the arrest and the charges. It continued. So that person did get expelled from school. Uh, and eventually, when I got word that they were no longer living in the Rochester area and had moved back to their hometown, which eventually was in like February or March of 2013, I decided to go back to Rochester and finish my degree and just try to, enroll again so I could get my degree and never have that regret that I didn't finish. And obviously that's different for every person, but for me, I knew I wanted to at least have that, to know that I finished the schooling and have that under my belt.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. That's it in a
Wow.
nutshell.
Wow, that is just an incredible story. I mean, that had a huge impact on your life. I mean, you put everything
Absolutely.
on hold in terms of
I did.
your career, your education, and move back home. So now you're physically moving to a new location in order to feel safe. That's a huge, huge impact on your life. And I understand your frustration by this lack of advocates that are specifically trained to help people like you. So I mean, I'm asking you because I really don't know. Why aren't there more resources and more advocates? Why is that not just generally available?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's one that I ask myself every day, right? I think it's a variety of reasons, but one of the ones that I focus on is that I think our society is really, really incident based. So what I mean by that is a car gets stolen, someone gets found with drugs, a window's broken at a business. It's very physical, it's tangible. You make the report, you can see that it happened. And I always kind of relate this to domestic violence in the same way that back in the day we used to have an understanding that, you might see, and I'm just using these terms and making a generalization, but you might see a woman with a black eye and she says that her husband hit her,
Mhm.
right? And you're like, okay, domestic violence, it's physical, it's tangible, there are marks. Now, as time has progressed, we've come to understand that in terms of domestic violence, that can also include coercion, manipulation, degradation. It's the psychological and the emotional abuse, right? That we also know takes a toll and is wrong. So I relate that to stalking, and I say that stalking is akin to those psychological and emotional abuses that we can't always see or prove, because stalking is a very insidious and subtle crime that sometimes individuals don't recognize that it's even happening to them. And so then what follows from that is that society just doesn't recognize it for what it is, which is a crime in all 50 states, by the way, and that it can be something that's very dangerous and very traumatic. And so I think now in the 2020s, we're just really beginning to understand this. And so certainly, I think in terms of folks who work in the fields of domestic violence and sexual assault, I think they have a good grasp and a good understanding and an agreement that stalking needs to be addressed and needs to have more resources. But of course, in our society, there's so much domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. All of these things are so prevalent that I think a lot of our resources and our funds are funneled to those causes. And I think that's great. And I'm not debating that, absolutely not debating it. But because of that, stalking sometimes is one of those victimizations that falls to the wayside in general, and it just doesn't get as much acknowledgement because it's also misunderstood, I think. And so
Mhm.
then because of that, it doesn't get the resources or the funds or the victim advocate positions made to help victims, right?
Mhm.
So I think finally stalking is starting to gain some traction when it comes to expanding the awareness and the resources, but it still has a really, really long way to go, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing to hopefully help it along.
Yeah, you should be really proud of the awareness that Breaking Stalking is bringing in terms of stalking and providing more resources. Can you tell us a little bit more about the resources that you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So at this time, Breaking Stalking is providing interactive educational presentations and workshops on stalking awareness and stalking prevention. So essentially, I have like a 1 and a 1.5 hour presentation that's well suited for people who have little to no education on the topic, and then a more in-depth workshop. So essentially, what I do is, as you already said, I raise that awareness, I provide the knowledge, I provide the resources, I
Mhm.
encourage action taking, and I also encourage building a proactive mindset. So I curate these presentations to be suited for college students, for example, or faculty and staff on campus, or college security, or even high school teachers or administration or counselors and other community organizations. So I'm essentially teaching why this is indeed relevant to them, how to recognize stalking, what stalking could consist of, how to address stalking, how to document it, and of course those additional resources that people can reach out to. And then I also delve into stalking myths and misconceptions, how media portrays stalking, contextualizing stalking, effects on victims. And then I go a little deeper. So if people, maybe if it's for staff and administration, how to respond to someone who might confide in you that stalking is happening to them. I also give a lot of statistics, case studies, and I try to pack all of that into the basics presentation, but we go much deeper in the workshop. And so those are kind of the two things that I focus on. And of course, we talk about safety planning and documentation and reporting to police and all of those sorts of tangible things that a lot of times you have to, people are just Googling on the internet because they don't know what to
Mhm.
do, and there's not always the best resources out there when we're Googling things.
Mhm.
So that's kind of a snapshot. And obviously, since me getting into this work stems from my own personal experience, I also offer speaking at events and conferences. So I've had the great opportunity to do some additional public speaking where I'm not necessarily educating on stalking, but I share more of my own personal story and essentially how I grew from it, what I learned, how it led me to become the entrepreneur that I am today. And of course, depending on the setting, I can infuse that with education and awareness. So in terms of those more educational offerings, I also offer that more inspirational, motivational talks. That's really great for conferences and events, and particularly for those colleges that might be looking to bring in a role model who can encourage students or anyone to stick with their goals and aspirations, even throughout those difficult life events that happen to us. Because even though we talk about college as that bubble, right? Things
Mhm.
happen on those campuses, and those
Sure.
students need support 100%. And so I think empowering the students and giving them a sense of what to do if something like this happens, but also empowering the administration and the faculty and staff to know how to respond to stalking and help students on campus, I'm also really passionate about, because I want those students to be able to participate, in their fraternity and sorority activities, right? And not have to feel like they have to leave any of that, because it's sad. It's sad when they have to leave those things.
Mhm. I'm so happy you're sharing that story. I think it's incredibly important. And I know there's a lot of students in the audience that you speak to. I'm sure that they identify with exactly what you went through or something similar. I guess if you could go back and talk to your younger self back in
Mm,
2011, right? When you
sure.
didn't have the resources you needed and didn't really know, like, where do I go from here? Where do I get help? Like all of these questions. So if someone right now is listening and they're being stalked on a college campus today, what can they do in order to help themselves?
Sure. So I always say, go to someone you trust.
Mhm.
Just tell someone. And as I mentioned earlier, stalking can sometimes not seem like it's actually anything because we don't know how to recognize it, right? But
Mhm.
even if it's just that little feeling inside of you that something isn't right, if you feel like you don't have the words to express it, you don't know how to put it into words, you don't really know what's going on, but something just feels off or wrong or weird, or maybe like, oh, maybe it's just in my head. I think a lot of times folks who are in their 20s might have these thoughts, right? And we don't pay attention to those instincts. It doesn't matter. Just tell someone, is what I say. Because you just never know what might happen. Like in my case, right? I thought this person was a friend. I would have never in a million years thought that there was a GPS tracker on my car.
Mhm.
So even if it's a fellow student or a friend, tell someone. The next thing that a lot of people, or that is standard practice, I would say, in terms of responding to stalking, is telling the offender to stop. So once, in a clear and concise manner, in whatever way that they're contacting you, tell them to stop the behavior, stop the action. They also recommend documenting everything. So text messages, calls, emails, social media messages. I actually have a free PDF documentation log that I made. There probably are others that exist online out there, but you want to document everything because essentially when you do that, you're starting to display what's called the course of conduct of stalking. So then when you next step, report to a formal support on campus. So reporting to your formal support, you'll be able to say, hey, look, I have the documentation from the past 2 months. This is what's been happening to me. Can you please help me, right? Like, what are the next
Mhm.
steps? What exists? And so, of course, you can go to your Title IX coordinator, dean's office, campus security, your fraternity, sorority professionals, even an RA. I would rather see someone go to an RA or even a professor that they trust if they don't feel comfortable going to the dean's office or security, for example, and telling someone like an RA or a professor that they trust, as opposed to not telling anyone at all, right?
Mhm.
And hopefully
Mhm.
from there, your formal supports can connect you to additional campus resources like your counseling center, maybe you work with security, or even off-campus resources like victim advocates and other people that might be in the greater community that could help you, then that could help you safety plan and do more things like that.
That is really, really helpful. I'm so glad that you shared all of that because I think you're helping literally hundreds of people right now just with your words in terms of what they can do to help themselves. And, I checked out your social media account as well, and I saw the Survivors of Stalking support group that came together. So, what types of coping strategies and support are available to people in this group?
Yeah, so I'm kicking this off under the auspices of Safe Space CNY, and it's going to be a place where people who are no longer experiencing stalking will be able to come and have a space to essentially be heard, tell their story, find connection with other people who might have gone through something similar, and also to give and receive emotional support. So, on top of that, of course, different strategies that we might experiment with, different things work for different people, but breathing exercises, meditations, visualizations, all of these things can oftentimes help calm our nervous system from something traumatic that we've gone through. So I'm looking forward to sharing those and any other things that people who come to the group might want to experiment with. And it's really going to be a place where people can start to or continue to essentially process what they've endured and begin or continue their healing journey to transition from what I say victim to survivor to what I call thriver, because a lot of times I think we experience these traumatic things and there's no place to process it, especially with victims of stalking, because again, I think it's really misunderstood and there's not a lot of education around it. So I think by people finding a space to be heard, finding those connections, and knowing that they're not alone, hopefully, they'll be able to gain some support and move forward in their life.
I love it. I love that you have that resource available. It's really important. And, I'm also a huge fan of higher education. I mean, just this past weekend, I'm working on my dissertation, trying to finish up my chapter 3 here.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
so,
Good
so
luck to you with that.
yeah, exactly. I'm going to need a lot of it. I'm learning, but I want to know about your educational background in therapy and counseling. How has that master's program that you completed there, how is that helpful in terms of the process of building your business in breaking stalking?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I thought I wanted to be a full-time therapist, and the ultimate goal was to have my own private practice because I've
Mhm.
always wanted to be self-employed. And so I'm really loving what I'm doing right now to grow this business, and I love presenting to groups of people and helping to educate them. And I think that's connected because I wanted to be a therapist to help people first and foremost, and
Mhm.
my life has now transformed into this being the way that I help people. But I think being a trained therapist has definitely been helpful when it comes to honestly guiding a lot of the individuals who have reached out to me privately and
Mhm.
they've actually needed support or resources because they were currently going through a stalking situation or helping a friend go through a stalking situation, and they may have hit a dead end or just not have known where to go. So even though I don't offer private consultation technically right now, I've had people from all over the nation find my Instagram or find my website and reach out. So of course I guide them in the right direction and kind of go over some of the tips and strategies that I offer in my presentations to hopefully help them in their own situation. And Additionally, I think if I wasn't a trained therapist, I might not feel comfortable running a survivors of stalking support group. So, but because I am, I think this really great opportunity exists for the community to have someone who is not only a survivor turned educator, but who also has that background as a therapist. So I think all of those aspects are kind of coming together quite nicely for me to do this work, which is, another great reason that I knew I wanted to go back and get that degree. Because even though I think at the time I knew that long term I might not want to provide individual therapy services, I
Mm.
knew that, having those skills would help me in the long run. And I think honestly, in most anything that you do, having the skills to be able to speak to people and not just hear them, but truly listen and understand them, I think those skills are helpful in any scenario, really.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're absolutely right. And we don't know which way life is going to go. I just think, you kind of have to like listen and be prepared for some turns, a left turn here, a right turn there, maybe
Sure.
a U-turn in life. I mean, these things happen. So you don't really know like how the skills that you learned in that program is ultimately going to help you. Just trust that it will. And clearly now, you can kind of see the fruits of it and you're like, oh, okay, that's why I was in this master's program. Now it all makes sense because I can use those listening skills in order to really make a big impact. And you are. So,
Yeah.
it's just everything happens for a reason. I'm convinced that it does.
Oh, I
And
absolutely believe that too.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny that, what you said just made me realize something. Because I had taken a break from my master's program, it was almost like this before the period of being stalked and after
Mhm.
the period of being stalked. And so when I went back to my master's program, I hadn't yet started like the big master's paper project that we had to do. And I ended up doing it on adolescent stalking awareness and like implications for marriage and family therapists and how they can address stalking in the therapy room and all of these things. So I started to bring the two worlds together because I was like, I'm gonna do it on this and this topic because there's not a lot of research or information. And so it just kind of went from there.
Yeah, you and I are alike in that way. I'm writing my dissertation on the early warning signs of hazing in college fraternities and sororities. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, I mean, you're really driven to make a difference. And that's exactly what you did. And I'm sure that gave you the fire to continue to get through that program because you knew you had a job to do. Like you had to help people in this way. And I'm
yeah,
sure that was really the impetus to go and say, we're going to finish this thing. And this is exactly what I'm going to be writing about. I'm sure it motivated you to finish.
yeah, definitely for sure. And I love that overlap there. I can't wait to read what you're writing. That sounds really fascinating and
Yeah.
interesting and also helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, we're just trying to save people and help our
Yeah.
younger selves in a certain way.
Yes.
Certainly, I was hazed as a part of my fraternity, and just thinking even back then, as an 18-year-old, saying there's got to be a better way than this, right? I mean, how
Yeah.
is this related to brotherhood and sisterhood and all these great values that we talk about in fraternity and sorority life? It just, there was a disconnect there, and I'm like, there's got to
Sure.
be a better way. So, here we are many, many years later, finally making that contribution to the field to actually bring that to fruition. So, yeah, you just don't really know, like, what life has in store, but just listen to what the universe is trying to tell you and it'll guide you
Yeah.
if you're
Agreed.
if you're paying attention and you're listening. So now that you're officially up and running with Breaking Stalking, I'm just wondering, as the head of this new organization, what are some of the future plans of some of the things that you would like to do in the future?
So things that I would like to do in the future, probably far off, but the United States does not have a specific stalking help hotline for victims. Now, the UK does, which is
Mhm.
interesting, but we don't have one here in the US. So as a nonprofit offshoot, I'd really love to start the first stalking victims help hotline here for the US. Because I think while there are some help hotlines that cater, or at least they market themselves as helping victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, rape, incest, etc.,
Mhm.
I think sometimes victims of stalking might not fully get the attention or the resources or the information or the tips that they might need in calling those places. So it's a good place to start, but I would love to have like a team of people on the phone to help stalking victims and survivors specifically, right? So that, we'll see what happens with that. It's on my list of things to do, though it's a pretty big undertaking.
It is a big
Um,
undertaking, but I think you got to put that out to the world. That's why I asked the
yeah,
question, because I
that's
think,
exactly right.
yeah, somebody's going to hear that and say, Stefania's right. We need a hotline for stalking.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, if there's a hotline for hazing, why shouldn't there be one for stalking? Like, these are things that are just needed, that are happening all the time on college campuses. So I just think you got to put it out in the world, and then somebody's going to contact you a couple of days later after this airs, and they'll be like, hey, you had a
Yeah.
really good idea there. Let's do that.
I'm so glad. I hope that does happen. And that is exactly, so we're definitely on the same page, you and I.
Yeah.
That is exactly why I speak it into the universe, because I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to keep it to myself. I'm going to say it. I'm going to speak it because it does need to come to fruition, because that would be a really great way, I think, to reach a lot more people all over the nation.
Yeah.
So it's really a goal of mine.
Yeah.
And additionally, sometimes I think about, I think a lot about prevention, right? Being proactive and prevention. And when I think about stalking prevention, because sometimes people are like, what can I do to prevent this? Well, I say, you can't predict human behavior, right? So we're not going to be able to fully eradicate stalking from the world, I don't think. Hence my tagline, educated and empowered, we can break stalking, hence the name of my organization. So I don't think we're going to get rid of it completely, but I think about what could be helpful in preventing stalking. And for me, it's just about the awareness and the education, but at an early age. So, how are we teaching our children and our kids in school about consent and boundaries and healthy relationships? So, this is another thing that's been in the back of my head. Longer term, I'd love to maybe develop additional curriculums around those topics that I just mentioned, healthy relationships and boundaries, and infuse those somehow into our schools' curriculums. I know that there's some of that in certain states, but I don't think it's mandated in all states and all schools. And personally, I think it should be, because if they're not getting it at school, most likely our parents' generations, mine certainly didn't teach me about healthy relationships and boundaries, and it's nothing against them. We just don't have that emotional education as a standard in our society, right? So I think offering that one day would be really exciting.
I 100% agree with you. And I'm going to say something that, I don't know, whatever, it is what it is. But the reality is, I think you and I are almost too late in terms of talking about our topics to college students. We
Mm,
actually have to back this up to high school, to junior high. I
yep.
mean, that's really where the conversation needs to start, maybe even before that in elementary school, when we start talking
Yeah.
about boundaries and healthy relationships. What does a healthy relationship look like? I mean, people are getting that information from like music videos, from movies,
TikTok.
TikTok. None of that's real. That's not
Correct.
real. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like, who's teaching, young men what a healthy relationship looks like? I mean, they're getting it from
Absolutely.
pornography, right? From
Yep.
their friends. They not from anything that's real. So yeah, I mean, I'm just really frustrated. We got to back this up and really talk about this at a much younger age. I mean, I love working with college students, don't get me wrong. That is my jam. But I often feel like we need to back up these conversations to a much younger age to just talk about healthy relationships and what that looks like. And if we can really set that foundation at a young age, then of course you're not going to stalk somebody. Of course you're not going to haze somebody.
Right.
Nobody
Right.
would do that if we just had healthy relationships. That,
Yep.
that's that's it. That's the core.
Yeah. Yeah. It's real. I really do believe healthy relationships. Yeah. The education around that is at the core. I think you're right. And you're right. It wouldn't just relate to preventing stalking. How many
Right.
other crimes and things would we prevent, like theft and sexual assault and the
Right.
hazing and burglary and robbery and theft and all of these other things? Because
Right.
if we're truly learning to respect each other as human beings, then we'll realize, well, I'm not going to do that, because even if I don't see that person when I break into their house, I know that that's going to cause some extreme harm, right?
Right.
Or
100%.
XYZ other crime, right?
Yeah, well, now this conversation is giving me all kinds of new ideas. So,
Right? I'm like, Mike,
so
what's our side project that we're
I
going
know
to
we have a
put
side
into
project.
the middle schools?
I
Come on.
know. Seriously, just to talk about healthy relationships for a minute, because they really, that is the core. That's where it all stems from. And I think, just
Agreed.
like you said, if we just respect one another, then all of these other problems end up going away later in life. But if that foundation is never set, then who knows what happens. So anyway, but here I am. So I do have to say my weakness is good food. Okay. I
Mhm.
really, really love having great food. And I do love Western New York. I mean, it's one of my favorite places to go back and visit. So the next time I'm speaking at Syracuse University, as an example, is there a particular restaurant in town that I need to try?
There are a handful. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Great. So there's two different places from the same owner. Shout out to women-owned businesses.
Mhm.
So she first made this great place, Rise and Shine Diner. They have a really great menu. I really recommend them for breakfast, or if you want fun drinks or milkshakes that are really out of control. The s'mores milkshake is my favorite. They've got some really good breakfast nachos, and everything that they do is just fun and different. So I really, really like them. She also has a restaurant called La La Lu. It's kind of a fun modern twist on Italian. It's a really great experience in terms of the food, but it's also a feast for the eyes because the decor is really fun, colorful. There's projections, there's glowing globes on the table. There's an orecchiette alla vodka dish. Orecchiette is just like a type of shape of a pasta for those who might not be super hardcore Italian like I am. And they serve it in a giant martini glass, and it's really delicious and fun. They have arancini egg rolls, which are also really delicious. And they have this ice cream tower for dessert. So they bring out this huge thing of like an ice cream cake on a tray. They roll it out and they cut you a slice, and it's like a gelato cake. And they have all these little extra treats to accessorize your ice cream with. So those
Wow.
are two really great places. Of course, in downtown Syracuse, you have Pastabilities. It's always a go-to for homemade pasta and bread and other unique dishes, and their famous spicy tomato oil, which is very delicious. And then Syracuse is home to the original Dinosaur Barbecue. So you can
Ah,
always check them
yes.
out.
Yes.
And right next to Dinosaur Barbecue, if you want some good homemade wood-fired pizza, there's a place called a Pizza Regionale, and they're really good too. And so I feel like all the places I gave you, with the exception of Rise and Shine Diner, were Italian places. Apparently, we do good Italian here in Syracuse. And there's a newer place. It's further out from downtown Syracuse. It's in Liverpool, but it's called Il Limone, and they have a lot of classic and traditional Italian dishes. So great pizza, great pasta, and sometimes they'll have some arancini, which are traditional rice balls on special. And they were really good. I actually just went there for Father's Day yesterday, and my mom ordered this ginormous, the size of your head, a roasted artichoke, like a stuffed artichoke. So it was stuffed with breadcrumbs and cheese, and then they roasted it. And then she got a second one to to take home. It was that good. So yeah. But the funny thing is that I always, so I actually ended up working at an Abbott's Custard when I was working in Rochester and living there. And
Uh-huh.
so I was like, oh, we don't have Abbott's in Syracuse. But we do. There's one Abbott's in Syracuse. It's hanging out all by itself, even though most of the Abbott's Custard are in Rochester, New York. But we also have an Abbott's here. So that's delicious. I just remembered that today. And so I think I'm going to go there tonight on this 90-degree day in Syracuse.
I love that you are like carbs overdose over here with
Oh,
pizza
it
and
was carbs
pasta.
overdose. Yes. Hope
I
you're in
love
the
it.
mood for that, because
Yeah,
yeah,
you better be in
I'll
the
I'll
mood for
email
that. If
you
you're
some
gonna be,
other ones that are less carby for when you can sit down.
if you're
And
hanging out with
actually, let me
Stefania,
know,
be
because I'll
prepared.
go with you. You'll have a friend. We'll go to one of these places. It'll be great. We'll just do
I,
like a tour.
I would love to do a tour. I want you to show me all of these places,
Let me know. Yeah.
and Dinosaur Barbecue is absolutely amazing. They have like a few different locations. They have one in New York City. They have the
Yes.
one in Syracuse, but
And the
that is
Rochester.
outstanding.
Yeah.
Rochester, that
Yeah.
is outstanding barbecue. As somebody who lives in Nashville, I will tell you that is really good barbecue. So I definitely highly recommend Dinosaur Barbecue. Fantastic. And listen, I don't get enough good Italian food here in Nashville. Like this is the
Okay.
one type of food that they are terrible at. Anything Italian, forget it. They don't even know what
Gotcha.
real Italian is.
Oh
They don't know.
no.
They don't know.
That breaks my
Barbecue,
heart. I
really
feel so
good.
bad.
I know. So I'm suffering over here, and I have to wait until I go to Syracuse so that way we can go out and get some really good
Sounds
Italian
good.
food.
Yeah.
So we'll make it happen. But listen,
Awesome.
I appreciate everything. This has been absolutely phenomenal. This has been a resource that I've really been looking for since like the inception of the Fraternity Foodie podcast, is to have somebody to come on and talk about stalking. And you are doing exactly what I had hoped that somebody would just take and run with, because there's just
Sure.
not enough resources out there for this. And it happens all the time. And there's just not the resources. So thank goodness you came around and you built it, because it's exactly what I would have done, and I love it. So
Thank
congrats to
you.
you and the business. Nothing but success going forward. And if our
Thanks.
college students, if they want to bring you in to come and speak on their
Sure.
college campus, where should they go to connect with you?
Wherever they are most comfortable to connect with me, because I am on, so Breaking Stalking is on Facebook, on Instagram, coming soon to TikTok. I know
All
we had that
right.
conversation. I'm trying to
Yes.
make that happen. You can go to breakingstalking.com to learn more. There's also a contact page. You can email me there. You can call or text my business number. You can also email me directly, Stefania, Stefania at breakingstalking.com.
I love it. Breakingstalking.com. There you can find everything, Facebook and Instagram. And I told Stefania, I'm like, you have to get onto TikTok, because this
Yes.
topic on TikTok is going to be explosive, because it's just like I said, it's a commonplace thing that happens that doesn't get talked about enough. And people are looking for resources. So I'm like, TikTok, I'm like, this is it. So that is going to take off once you launch. I can't wait to see you on there. Feel free to take a look at my account. If you need any ideas, just take
I
what I'm
will.
doing, make it relate to stalking, and you are on your way. I'm telling you. Uh, so nothing but success, Stefania. I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing all this great information with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad our paths crossed at that conference earlier in the year, and for
Yes.
having this platform for people to utilize their voices to help other people. That's really great too. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Appreciate
My
it.
pleasure, Stefania, and it's my pleasure to support you and the great work that you're doing. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Stefania, if you know somebody on your college campus that could benefit from the resources that she's providing at Breaking Stalking, I want you to share this interview with them, because that's the only way that they're going to know that this resource is available for somebody who has experienced stalking before. So please share this conversation with them on social media. Send it to them by DM, send them an email, so that way they can listen to everything Stefania has to say and get the resources they need. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.